Welcome to the Sage Family Podcast, where we explore natural homeschooling, gentle parenting,
simple living, and family adventure.
I'm Rachel Rainbolt, the Sage Family Mentor, coming to you from an island in the Pacific Northwest, where I live wild and free in connection with my hilarious husband and 3 growing sailors in our fixer-upper on the beach. So join us around the campfire and let's get living the family life of our dreams. This is episode 80, and today I'm here with Dr. Eli Lebowitz talking about childhood anxiety. Professor Lebowitz studies and treats childhood and adolescent anxiety at the Yale Child Study Center. His research focuses on the development, neurobiology, and treatment of anxiety and related disorders, with special emphasis on family dynamics and the role of parents in these problems. Dr. Lebowitz is the lead investigator on multiple funded research projects and is the author of over 100 research papers, books, and chapters on childhood and adolescent anxiety. He is also the father of 3 great boys. If you are the parent of a great kid who struggles with anxiety, you are not alone. Of all the juicy topics we dive into in the Sage Family Village, I would say childhood anxiety is the most often and most deeply discussed. It's something I'm quite passionate about supporting families with from both my professional background and personal experience, because I have witnessed what a profound effect how you show up as a parent can make when anxiety is part of your family's story. So whether you join the other gentle parents navigating this journey in the Sage Family Village, or reach out for some one-on-one coaching, or read Eli's book, there is help. And this podcast episode is a wonderful place to start. I hope to see you in the village at sagefamily.com/village. I was first introduced to space by Dr. Bill Stixrud and Ned Johnson, who joined me on this podcast in episodes 53 and 66. Then I read Eli's book, Breaking Free of Childhood Anxiety and OCD, and it gave some structure and validity to the ACT work I'd been doing with families, opening up and creating space for anxiety instead of avoiding it. More on that in episode 75. And then the parenting work of reducing accommodations and holding calm, confident space for the feelings that show up. Thank you so much for your work, Eli. I'm excited to dive in with you.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Will you introduce yourself and share a bit more about who you are and what you're passionate about?
Sure. I'm Eli Lebowitz. I'm a psychologist and an associate professor at the Yale Child Study Center, where I co-direct a program focused on child anxiety. That is, I guess, one of the things I'm passionate about. We do clinical trial research, brain-based research, all trying to better understand these problems and to develop and test treatments for these problems.
Awesome. Okay, your model for reducing anxiety in children is really based on reducing accommodations. So can you explain what accommodations are in this context and why they're problematic?
Absolutely. Accommodation is really just a fancy word for all of the changes that parents and others, but we focus a lot on parents, the parents make in their own behaviors in order to help their child not feel anxious. And this is the most natural thing in the world. So if anybody's listening to this and ends up thinking, oh no, I've been accommodating, well, if that's true, you're like about 99% of other parents who have a child who's anxious, because it really is the most natural thing in the world. If your child struggles with being away from you, for example, you might adjust for that. Maybe you sleep next to them, or you don't go out in the evenings, or you FaceTime with them throughout the day because they're scared if they can't see you. Or if your child is socially anxious and really struggles with talking to other people, you might accommodate for that. Maybe you speak in place of them in various situations. Maybe you try not to have people over to your house because it would make them uncomfortable. Or maybe you just find yourself answering lots and lots of worried questions that your child might have about anything from their health to your finances, to how they're going to do in school or the future or the war in Ukraine or lots of other things. And these are all examples of what we mean when we say accommodation.
You have this quote in the book that I think speaks nicely to like the blame piece that we can, like as parents, we can kind of get stuck in when we're examining this like accommodation thing, where you say the important thing about accommodation is not that it makes a child anxious or even keeps him anxious. It's that by reducing the accommodation, a child can become less anxious. So I love how you like explain what it is, but then you also kind of clarify that it's not about like blame or even like cause of how we got here. It's more, hey, we just see like in the data that reducing this reduces the anxiety. So I love that you bring that piece to it.
Yeah, it's exactly right. This isn't about blaming parents at all. And let's face it, I represent a field that has done a lot of damage over the years by blaming parents for children's problems. We've promoted theories historically of parents to blame for schizophrenia, for autism, for lots and lots of different problems. And it's bogus. It's not really true. And that is true for anxiety also. If you have an anxious child, that's not your fault. That is who your child is. But the fact that you didn't cause them to be anxious doesn't mean that you can't help them to overcome the anxiety. And so that's what we're focusing on, is how you can actually help them to get better, which I think most parents just really, really want to do.
Yeah, it's like an empowering message. I think specifically for my audience, we're pretty like countercultural. A lot of the families that are listening to this conversation right now, there's a lot of like gentle parenting and a lot of homeschooling families in particular. So it can be tricky to discern like what are intentional parenting, educational, and lifestyle choices made in better alignment with human nature that help our children thrive, and what are anxiety avoiding accommodations that actually hobble our children in the long run. Like I witnessed a lot of families struggling to discern between those two. And I really like the question, like, is this helping my child to avoid or escape a feeling of anxiety? Or is this helping my child to live a meaningful and fulfilling life for which discomfort is the price of admission? I know you speak to that a little bit in your book too, but I just kind of wanted to point out for families specifically that are already living very counterculturally, it can be tricky to figure out where that line is, since we're not just like comparing ourselves necessarily to like, well, what's everyone else doing? What's normal?
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And, it can be tricky, but I don't think of myself as a parenting guru, right? I'm not trying to tell people how to parent their child. I think there are a lot of different ways to be an excellent parent. And you might be more in line with cultural vogue, or you might be more outside of current trends. But there are so many different ways to raise a child with love and thriving and understanding. And my role here isn't to say this is how to parent children. What I'm focused on is sometimes a child gets stuck in a certain problem. And in that situation, sometimes we need to do something specific that is going to be helpful to them. So it's not about changing your whole parenting style or philosophy. It's about what does the evidence and the science and the research show actually works and helps in overcoming this particular problem. Now, it's true, even with that in mind, of course, yes, it can be tricky to figure out, is this helpful or is it unhelpful? But the essential question really becomes, is this accommodation that I'm making, right? Is it helping my child to avoid more? And thereby really teaching them that they can't really pay that price of admission to life, that they can't really cope with and tolerate and deal with the discomfort and distress that come with being anxious some of the time? Or am I doing the opposite? Am I helping them to take a step forward, to take one more step forward toward better coping? Sometimes even an accommodation can be a step forward. If your child has been out of school, for example, for weeks because they're so anxious about going to school, maybe because of the separation from you or all of those social encounters with other people or the stress of learning, or they have OCD and they're just flooded with worries about all of the gross contamination that they see around them in a school setting. If your kid hasn't been in school for the past 2 weeks, you might think, well, what about if I go into school with you and I hang around for a while so that you can go in? Is that an accommodation of anxiety? Yeah, it definitely is. But is it also a step forward? It is, because you're going from not really coping at all to at least coping a little bit more. So there can be accommodations that are helpful, but when we see ourselves actually kind of doing the opposite and helping the child to avoid more or to stay stuck, well, that's where we think it's not that helpful, and making some changes there is likely to be beneficial.
Quitting as an accommodation might be a helpful example for us to chew on together. In my Sage Homeschooling book, I talk about the wisdom and bravery of noticing when something is not nurturing your well-being and making a different choice, quitting. But I also know that avoidance is anxiety's go-to move. When we face a challenge, anxiety says, "Danger, don't do it." Then if you quit, she insidiously purrs, "See, I told you you couldn't do it." So in our family, we do two things. One, we don't quit on a hard day. So if we find ourselves in an uncomfortable challenge, we work through it, get to the other side, and then decide if this activity is a value add for us. Two, to say no to one thing, we have to say yes to something else. So avoidance isn't an option, replacement is. If this activity no longer feels like a good fit, then what other activity would you like to try to replace this one?
In place of those accommodations, you recommend offering support, which you formulate like so simply and aptly and lovely as acceptance plus confidence. Love it. So what does this kind of support like really look and sound like?
Yeah, that's exactly the recipe that I would be suggesting. This is almost like a North Star, like a compass to navigate by, because nobody can predict every single situation that they might encounter. But if you have this basic recipe in mind, it'll help you to navigate 1,000,001 different specific situations. So what's the recipe? It's what you said. It's acceptance and confidence. It can sound as simple as saying to your child, "I get it. This is genuinely hard for you, and I believe that you can handle it." So you're showing that acceptance. You're not denying it. You're not dismissing it. You're not teasing them for it or telling them, "Why don't you suck it up and be a big boy?" You're saying, "I get it. It's really hard, but also I know that you can handle it. I know that you are strong." And it's like holding up a reflection of your child. It's like holding up a mirror that they can look into and they can see themselves as strong and as capable and competent. Because so often when we do cope with a lot of anxiety, when we struggle with anxiety throughout, life, really, we end up feeling really vulnerable and really helpless. And that leads to more avoidance and more impairment and ultimately even more anxiety. Teaching your anxious child that anxiety is something they can handle, it's like the biggest gift you can give them, because it's going to pay dividends really for the rest of their lives, literally. And, unfortunately, a lot of anxious children are actually going to grow up hearing themselves explicitly described in the opposite terms of, "My kid can't deal with anxiety. My kid goes to pieces and falls apart. My kid can't cope with stress." And those aren't said in a mean way. That's just a parent observing what they're witnessing.
Yeah.
But if that's what you hear about yourself, that's also what you're going to believe about yourself.
Yeah.
And so you end up feeling so much more anxious and so much more vulnerable. So that message of support, "I get it, but also I know that you can handle it," is really important for anxious children to be hearing.
Yeah, I think a lot of parents like try to respond to their child's anxiety by like trying to solve the problem and take that discomfort away, which you said, it's like that human nature, that parenting instinct,
Mhm.
right? If our child is in distress, we want to save them from the bear or whatever.
course.
But instead, I think what Ellie is trying to invite you all to do, and I fully endorse it, is just to raise children who are comfortable being uncomfortable. It's such like a simple
Mhm.
message, but my teenagers like to sarcastically joke with each other, let's sit in the discomfort together, because that's something I said to them all the time as kids. So they love to like joke about it and they're trying to tease me. But when they do, I'm like, yeah, you joke about it, but you all are like really hardy. um, so like if we were on a hike and one of them like ate all their trail mix and started talking about how they were really hungry, I would just say, oh, let's sit in that discomfort together. Like, tell me about what you're feeling inside your body. Ah, okay. So it sounds like hunger is going to join us for the rest of our hike today. There's plenty of space out here for hunger to be on the trail with us. Like, we do have more trail mix back at the car. Like, so when we do make it, when we do finish our hike, you can have some more back at the car, but you ready to get on this hike, hunger, and kind of be like playful with his belly. And then we just move forward, move through the experience. So like, I'm not making a sibling give him trail mix. I'm not running up ahead to get the trail mix. I'm not like talking about it repeatedly. Like, we're just carrying on with the worthwhile thing, knowing that it's worth it to engage in this like meaningful life, uncomfortable at times. And when you create that like acceptance and convey that confidence, they really do internalize it. I feel like my kids, there's a lot of anxiety like in our family tree. And some of that was just like, for a couple of my kids in particular, like that's kind of a component of their nature, but I feel like they really do live an awesome life because they believe that it's okay for anxiety to join them on the trail. Like, that's okay. We can do the thing anyway.
That is such a terrific example, right? Like you could jump in and try to rescue, right? Like you could say like, oh no, what are we going to do? How are you going to be okay? But you're able to communicate to them, you know what, you actually are okay. Does it mean you don't feel a little bit uncomfortable right now? No, yeah, maybe you do feel that, but actually you are okay. And that sets up such a different attitude for all of the challenges that they're going to encounter tomorrow and next year and in 10 years. And it just allows you to approach life with that kind of underlying feeling of, maybe it'll be challenging, but I'll be able to be okay. And I think it's just so important. And when you're talking about a child who really is vulnerable to a lot of anxiety, well, we know that there's very little we can do that is going to completely remove that predisposition in a child, that kind of innate tendency toward anxiety. Even the best treatments, even medications, like they don't take away that basic tendency. And so what you really want to be teaching them is, you can be okay anyway. You can handle it. And especially because really so much of the impairment, of the real disruption to children's lives when they have anxiety, it doesn't actually come just from the fact that they have more anxiety than somebody else. It comes from the fact that they don't believe that they can handle the anxiety. I used to be really scared of flying. It's gotten a lot better actually, but I used to be really scared and I kind of hated it because, I'd get off an airplane, my whole body would be just achy and exhausted from all of the tension the whole time. And I'm just like running these horrible scenarios through my mind. And it's just like so uncomfortable. But I know that if I had said to myself, I'm not willing to go through that experience, that's too big for me, or that's too hard for me, I can't do it, I would still be afraid of flying today, and I would live a much more limited life, and I'd miss out on so many important, positive experiences because of that, right? Being willing to go through it means, A, you don't miss those experiences, B, your anxiety actually gets smaller over time.
Oh, I love that you brought in that personal example too. For me, it's like the ski lift, the chair lift. I don't know why. Like, I'm actually not an anxious person by nature, and I love skiing, and I do it anxious. Like, every time getting off that chairlift, I feel anxiety, and I do it anyway. Like, that it's really important. I get to have these whole trips with my family that are filled with so much joy. And if I just said like, no, I can't, because I feel anxious in that moment, I can't do it, I'd miss out on so much. So I love that. And I think just as someone who's a little bit further ahead on that parenting timeline than a lot of the families who might be listening, like I just want to instill that confidence that I can see a real through line between that kid learning to be comfortable being uncomfortable, like sitting in the hunger on the trail, and that kid who's now, my kid who's now in college and like thriving and coming up to really big challenges and really hard things and rising to them and overcoming them and doing this stuff scared and being imperfect. And there, I just really like see, as I'm looking back, like this really strong connection between those two things, which is all this stuff that you're talking about, like how to show up in support without like rescuing them from life, really, which is essentially what you're doing. Because if you rescue them from the anxiety, you're also rescuing them from all the great things that are on the other side of that hill, right?
Exactly. I mean, there are so many other contexts in which we get this, but sometimes with anxiety, it's a little bit harder to get it. You have a child and like some babies even are born with like weaker muscle tone than other babies, and things are actually harder for them. It's true, right? Like sitting up and standing and like these things are genuinely harder for them. But most parents get, and if they don't get, a doctor will definitely tell them that the solution is not to always pick this child up, right? Like it's not to always carry them around everywhere because you want them to build up that muscle. And you believe that it's possible. The kid who's born with weaker muscle tone, they're still able to learn to walk, even if they do fall over a few more times along the way. And you want them to get there. And so, we curb that instinct of, I'm going to rush in and I'm going to save you and I'm going to protect you, because it's a great thing to always have someone to rescue you. But to always need to be rescued is such a vulnerable way to live. It's such a limiting way to live, right? And you don't want your child to feel like, even if there is someone to rescue me all the time, you don't want them to feel like they always need to be rescued.
Yes. Oh, that is so beautiful. I really hope people are listening to that. I remember when one of my kids was younger and she had this moment with her speech where it was like her brain, there was a lot of anxiety in it, where her brain would go faster than her mouth could keep up with. And I remember other people around me would start to just speak for her, and I would always pause them, just get down on her level, take a slow, deep breath and say, we have all the time in the world. I'm right here listening. And I'm not trying to, exactly like you said, it's just about like, no, I accept that like this is hard for you and I'm confident that you can do it. I'll sit here all day, until you can get this thought out. And of course, it doesn't take all day, but that like acceptance and confidence in place of just, I'll just talk for them because that's too hard, right, or that makes them feel uncomfortable. That really is like a formula to help your kids to get where not just you hope they would be, but where they'll want to be. I think you also talk about how research shows that parents who consistently increase their supportive responses to their child's anxiety and decrease the accommodations they provide are as effective at reducing their child's anxiety as individual cognitive behavioral therapy delivered directly to the child, which I think like a lot of parents, when their kid has anxiety, it's like, okay, fix them. But maybe the kid is not on board with this, like that requires a lot of investment and active participation on the part of the kid. So I love that your approach doesn't require their buy-in because it's about what you're doing.
Yeah, no, it really blew us away when we realized this. We have done multiple randomized controlled trials and really looked at this very carefully. And, we set out to do these studies because we did believe that this would have efficacy, that it would be helpful. But when you realize that this is just as effective as doing therapy directly with a child, bringing them in every week for a session with a therapist and teach them tools, and then they have to practice those tools at home. When you realize that you as a parent just going and doing this and changing your own behavior is literally just as effective as that, I mean, it's really mind-blowing. And it is so important because it adds another tool in our toolbox for how can we help children. And especially since, as you said, not every child actually is an ideal candidate for doing therapy themselves. There are children who won't do it. There are children who can't do it for a variety of reasons, like communication issues or other comorbid problems that might exist. There's a lot of children who really can't do that. And so having another tool that doesn't require your kid to literally do anything is amazing. And that's not an exaggeration. When I start working with parents in SPACE, which is the name of the treatment that we're talking about, I make a simple promise to them. I say to them, look, throughout this whole treatment, I am never going to ask you to make your child do anything. And I'm not going to ask you to stop your child from doing anything. You might have other parental obligations. I'm not taking all of those away, but I'm not going to add to them. I'm not going to make you make your child do anything. And that's partly because I know they can't. It's really easy to give parents advice like, well, make your kid do this or make your kid do that. And you know what? Sometimes it goes fine because they're on board and they're collaborative, they're motivated and like great team, we're working together. Lots of times doesn't look like that at all. Lots of times you end up with a parent who comes home and doctor said, I'm supposed to make you do an exposure or I'm supposed to make you practice your breathing. And the kid says no. And then what do? You start pushing harder. And the kid resists, and you end up in a fight, and we've caused conflict, and you may cause more harm than good by giving that advice for a lot of families. So when we say to parents, the only thing you need to control is your own personal behavior, it's really liberating.
Yeah. Yes. And like, this is something I talk about all the time in the context of parenting, of being clear on your sphere of control. Your work as a parent is this, is like to control how you show up, to regulate your emotional state. So when a parent comes and says, oh, my kid is doing this thing and it's driving me crazy, like, we don't look at changing what the kid is doing. We look at, okay, what's going on in you? How can you show up differently? So I love how this plan just plays so nicely into that. So after mapping the accommodations, which is kind of that you're currently making, which is what you recommend doing first, then you recommend just choosing one to work on first. And I just love the simplicity and the focus that provides. How do we choose which accommodation to work on first?
Yeah, well, first of all, definitely we just want to choose one. I never say to parents, just stop all of it, right? Just stop all the accommodations, because they can't. Honestly, even if they could, I'm not confident that would be better for a child. When you look at how many accommodations are often happening, and when we really do that process of like mapping out the accommodations, there can be a lot. And it might be pretty overwhelming for a child if, parents just suddenly shut it all off and are doing none of that. Overnight, it's all gone. That might be really hard. But frankly, it doesn't even matter if it would be good for the child or not, because parents can't do it anyway. Yeah. They wouldn't succeed. And what they would end up doing is just being really inconsistent and sometimes doing it here, sometimes accommodating there, other times not. And that sends a really confusing message to a child who doesn't understand, like, maybe you're not doing it now just because like you're mad at me or you're busy and something else feels more important to you. It's hard to give a really supportive, consistent message that way. So we choose one. What are we looking for in terms of where's a good place to focus? What's a good choice? I would say look for something you're doing frequently. Don't choose something that happens every 2 weeks, because it'll feel like the first time every time you do it, right? Because 2 weeks passed until the next time. Look for something that you're doing 2-3 times a week or more. And it can be more. It can even be a lot more. And if even that one accommodation feels like too much, because maybe it's happening 30 times a day instead of like 3 times a week, well, maybe you want to reduce it gradually. Maybe you want to cut it in half for a first step, or focus on the mornings or the evenings. So one thing is look for something that's happening pretty frequently. Look for something that feels meaningful, that if you did stop it, it would improve your life as a parent, or it would improve your child's life if they didn't need that accommodation anymore. Think about what you're really motivated to reduce, and make sure that you really are picking something that's a behavior of yours. Right? Don't fall into the trap of, what's the accommodation that I'm going to stop? Well, my kid keeps calling me at work throughout the day because they're worried. Yeah, they are, but that's not your accommodation, right? That's them and their anxiety symptom. So you might want to flip that around and say, I'm answering my kids' phone calls. throughout the day, because that's something that you actually can plan to make a change in.
Nice. Okay. The next step is to make a plan. So can you walk us through the components of a good plan? I know we already talked about like it needs to be within your control. Make sure we're focusing on that. But what else? What are the components of a good plan?
I think a good plan is going to be pretty detailed, because you don't want to be improvising in the moment, right? You don't want to be suddenly, when your kid's really anxious, like starting to figure out the details of your plan. So thinking it through in a lot of detail beforehand makes sense. And a good plan is going to provide answers to some key questions. It's going to say, what is the thing that I'm actually doing? Maybe I'm stopping to speak in place of my child at the library or in a restaurant or at the school or whatever. So what is the thing that I'm doing? But it's also going to say, how much am I reducing that accommodation? Is it completely? Is it partially? Maybe it's a gradual reduction. So how much? It's also going to say when. When does this plan start and when does it apply? Is it every day? Sometimes there's a good reason to have some differences in different days. Maybe weekends are just really different. We're not going to focus on that for now. Maybe I'm stopping the accommodation of driving my child to school instead of them taking the school bus. But you know what? Their best friend, there's one day a week that kid doesn't ride the bus. And I know that's going to make such a big difference for my child if they can sit next to their best friend on the bus. So I'm not going to focus on that day. So we think about the when. Think about who is involved in this, starting with yourself. And if it's two parents, are you both on board? Are you both going to be doing the same thing? Are there any adjustments that have to be? Sometimes there are two households, and we need to sort of adjust for that and make a plan that we can kind of work for both of them. But also think about other people that might be involved. Maybe you need to talk to your kid's teacher about what you're doing, so that you let them know that you are stopping the accommodation of doing all their homework for them or checking all their homework for them lots of times. And you don't want this teacher to suddenly be criticizing the child for, wow, your work's really gone downhill. What's wrong with you? You want them to understand in advance. So reach out to them and tell them. And by the way, you can get help from other people as well. As you're thinking about the who's involved, I really encourage parents to make use of all the other people in their lives that can be helpful. The grandparents and the uncles and the friends of the family and the child's, judo instructor. And, those people can be really helpful. They can reach out and praise a child for what they're doing. Or sometimes they can actually help with the plan itself. Like, I'm going to start going out in the evening, but I haven't done that in years. I don't have a babysitter because I've never gone out. So who's going to be a babysitter? It's kind of scary to bring a new babysitter. Maybe it's a kid and they don't even know my child very well. And what if this kid has a panic attack and freaks out? That seems scary. Well, maybe a supporter of mine, like an uncle or an aunt or somebody, can be that babysitter for the first couple of times. So think about the who. And also a plan should include, what is it that you're going to do instead of the accommodation? When your child is coming to you and asking you that worried question and you're trying not to answer, it's a lot easier if you think about what you will do in that moment, right? It's always easier to stop a behavior if you know what you should be doing instead of trying to stand there sort of frozen and not doing anything. And then you get upset and you end up angry at the kid for pushing your buttons. And so think about what you will do. Maybe you'll just make a supportive statement like, I see that you're worried. I'm confident you can handle it. And you're going to go take the dog for a walk for a few minutes, or go get a coffee, or listen to your podcast or something like that. So you think about all of those things. And if you really think that through and you ask yourself, what's going to trip this up? What's going to make it hard? And you try to problem solve for those things, well, you have a much better chance of actually succeeding in implementing your plan.
Yes, those last two ones, I think they often get overlooked by people of like, what are you going to do instead? And then what's going to be hard about it? Like one of the types of coaching I've been doing with parents for many years on is like nighttime parenting coaching, sleep coaching. And I And I learned very early on, if the plan is missing those two components, they're way less likely to be successful. What are in that moment? What are you going to do instead of what you were doing before? You said it could be like listening to this podcast, right? Like, or it could, whatever the thing is, you're going to go and eat that chocolate chip cookie that you've been hiding. Whatever the thing is, having a plan for what to do instead, and then anticipating what's going to be hard about it. And I like to invite my parents to imagine, really, like what's like the most ridiculous, hard thing that you can possibly imagine this child would do in this scenario. And let's like have a plan for it. And that that's so helpful.
Yeah. And there are so many things that can make it hard, right? Like maybe I'm trying to make a plan for how I'm not going to speak in place of my child, but it gets really awkward.
Yeah.
It gets embarrassing, right? Like you're somewhere and somebody tries to say something to your kid or ask them a question and they don't answer. And you just, like 10 seconds feel like an hour in that moment because suddenly they're like looking at you and they're questioning, or maybe other people are around and you feel like everybody's staring at you and you might feel that pressure. How are you going to handle that? Maybe you'll actually, instead of speaking for the child, maybe you'll actually just say to them, I'm working on not speaking in place of my child because this is a challenge for them and I'm trying to help them to overcome it, for example. Mm-hmm. Maybe you'll reach out to some of the people in advance of that situation. So you're going to the Thanksgiving, I guess we're late for Thanksgiving, but those family events, we're coming up on the holidays and you go to the family dinner and people try to talk to your kid and they're the only one who doesn't answer and everybody's staring at you. But it would be so much easier if you reached out to 2 or 3 people beforehand and you said, I just wanted to let you know that my kid finds it hard sometimes to interact in social situations. And I'm trying a plan where I'm not going to be jumping in to do that for them. So you might notice that it takes them a little while and just understand it. And then when you're in that moment, instead of feeling that cringe of everybody's judging me right now, you can look over at that person and get a little thumbs up, get a little nod. And you just feel so much better about it and you're able to stick to your plan.
Yeah, like being like clear with people, like here's what being supportive would look like in this scenario that we're going through. Like if you could just bring a little bit of extra patience and know that it's going to take them a little bit longer to respond. That, like you said, that can like change the entire dynamic and the entire emotional atmosphere of those interactions. I love that. I was reminded while you're talking of this situation I had not too long ago with my 2 kids too. I have 2 of my 3 kids are teenagers and they were both working in this same program. One of them drives, one of them doesn't. The one who drives has a very hard time getting places on time, has a hard time getting up in the morning, has a hard time getting places. And the younger one is very, very much always on time, always up early. I had been staying out of it, but they were carpooling together to this place of employment. A program that I'm involved into, the younger ones got into this accommodation like habit of waking up the older one. And again, I was like, okay, I'm going to stay out of it. Like for as long as I possibly can. The younger one would wake up the older one. The older one started like resisting. There started to be this like dynamic between them. He's trying to like drag her out of the room, so I finally had to step in and say like, okay, this accommodation like isn't serving either of you anymore. So here's what we're going to do. The younger one, you are not waking up the older one. The older one, we have to give you the space to like kind of sink or swim on your own here. And like you said, in terms of tapping to the village, I reached out to the director of this program, who I also have a relationship, and said, hey, just a heads up, this is the dynamic that we're changing. And so if they are late, please don't penalize the younger one. Please know that he was ready on time and sitting in the car and ready to go. And whatever, the natural consequences are, that's, fine for the older one to experience them, but please like exclude the younger one from that. And they were super supportive and fully on board. And it just took like a week of them kind of working out through that experience. And then like everything was fine. So that was like just a semi-recent example of kind of like noticing an accommodation and kind of like being aware of it and then stepping in and saying, okay, let's reduce this accommodation and because it's not working for you guys anymore.
I love this example. And I, first of all, it's kind of funny as well as really on point. And no, it's like, this is a kid who's really doing like what a parent might be doing. So when you're trying to get your kid to school and you're like spending
Which I never did.
Out of bed.
Yeah, which I never did, which is why it's funny, because I very much give them a lot of like space to grow into that independence and to not be that person for them. So it was funny to see this like coming up in the dynamic between the two kids.
Yeah, but it does make me want to add that, the actually accommodation of not just, tardiness, but anxiety does happen a lot by siblings. There is a lot of accommodation that happens by siblings, and sometimes not even knowingly. Sometimes they do realize that they're accommodating anxiety. Other times they don't even get it, that that's what's happening. You might have a toddler who is more than happy to sit in the bathroom when their older sibling takes a shower and listen to a story or talk to them and thinks this is amazing because finally my older sibling is spending some time talking to me and paying attention to me, and it feels great. And they don't even realize that they're accommodating anxiety. And other times they do realize it. Also, sometimes it happens willingly and sometimes unwillingly. There can be, in some cases, there can also be an element of coercion that occurs between siblings, where I'm imposing my anxious rule on you. You're not allowed to contaminate the one chair that I'm allowed to sit on because of my obsessive compulsive contamination fears. Or you're not allowed to have friends over for a play date because of my social anxiety, or lots of other examples like that. And even though with most cases, we stick to the rule of control your own behavior as a parent and not your child's. And so we're generally not saying, forbid your child from accommodating their sibling, because that can backfire just like any other thing that you try to do can backfire. But when there really is coercion like that, you do need to support the other sibling as well. And if you say to them, you don't need to do this, you're not obligated or expected to do it, you do also have to stand by them and, protect them from possible fallout or consequences of not accommodating their sibling.
Yes, I love that point. That's such an important point. And at this point, like my kids are old enough that it was just enough for me to like point out, like, hey, I don't think you guys noticed that this, like, you've kind of fallen into this dynamic and it's really not working for either of you. So like, I'm going to invite you guys to make these shifts. Like, these are the shifts that I propose. And they're like, yes, that sounds great to both of us. And that like resolved a lot of the problems. But certainly like when they were younger, like you said, there were often times where I would like notice that they would fall into some sort of accommodation dynamic like that. And it would be certainly more active on my part in terms of protecting, the one kid from the coercive efforts of the other kid to try and put them back into that accommodating role.
Yeah.
Okay. How should we tell a child about this change? We just made this plan. We identified the accommodation. We made the plan. How do we break it to our kid? How do we explain to them what's going to happen and what's going to be different?
Yeah, well, I like the question partly because it is assuming that we do tell them, and we do.
Yes.
which sounds kind of obvious, but sometimes when parents are making these changes, sometimes they're a little nervous about how the child's going to react. How are they going to respond? Maybe they'll get upset with me, or they'll yell at me, or they'll say, but you don't care about me anymore, you don't love me, or like these really hard things, or they'll have a temper tantrum. And that can sometimes lead parents to want to avoid telling the child in advance because we're just trying to sort of sidestep that. But I never recommend that. It's not really fair to the child to not tell them this is what I'm doing. But also, if you don't tell them in advance what you're doing, it means you're also not telling them why you're doing it. And that's really important too. Telling them your plan also gives you the opportunity to tell them the rationale, to tell them why you're making this change. And so what I usually recommend is write a letter to your child. It doesn't have to be long. It's not a novel, just brief, but like write a letter. And the best way that I think this works is to actually read that to them and give it to them. And the reason I say to read it to them instead of just planning what you're going to say and then going ahead and telling them is that, although we might not always like to admit it, if you are reading from a page, you are just infinitely more likely to say what you planned.
Yeah.
When you start talking honestly, nobody knows where you're going to end up.
You have to understand that when I was a child and what my
Exactly.
mother did. And
Exactly. Or, you start out and you have it all in mind, but then your kid interrupts you, right? Like you start out really nice. I understand how hard it is for you. And your kid says, you don't understand anything. And
you don't love
suddenly,
me.
you don't love me. Suddenly you're in this whole other argument, or maybe you're getting mad at them. It's so much easier to take a breath and look at your page and read from it if you have it written out. So I would say just write a brief letter, start out really positive, say something positive. We love you so much. You're a great younger brother or older brother or student or whatever. You have a beautiful smile. Just say something positive, because that signals to your child that this isn't an angry message. Right? We're not coming here to scold you because we're mad. We're here because we care and want to help. And so you start out really positive, make a supportive statement. Just say, we know you get anxious when, and we believe you can handle it. And then take responsibility for your own choices. You can say something like, I have realized that what I've been doing, like always speaking in place of you, sleeping next to you, blah, blah, blah. What I've been doing, focused on that one accommodation that you're targeting, I realized it's not the best way to help you. And saying that removes the blame from your child, right? You're not saying, why do you always want me there? Why do you always pester me? Why are you doing this? It's saying, I realized that I could be doing this better. And it also sets up the fact that you're going to change it. Because if I'm saying this isn't the best way, well, I guess it makes sense that I'm going to change it. And then you just tell them the basic points of the plan, starting tomorrow, I'm going to do this, or I'm not going to do that. And you follow that with more support. I know it sounds really hard, and I'm sure you're going to be okay. And you might want to say, like, I'm not doing this to punish you. You've not done anything wrong, right? So you just make it really clear that this isn't about that. And that's it. You just end with, like, I love you so much. And that's it. It's pretty brief and pretty short, but it's supportive and it's loving. I compare it, like, as a metaphor. I'll say to parents, think about how you would tell your child that they have to undergo like a painful or a scary medical procedure, right? Like, you would be kind, right? Like, you're not mad at them. Why would you be angry at them for getting, dialysis, right? Like, nobody would be mad at them for it. You'd be kind about it and compassionate, but also you really wouldn't want them to leave. You wouldn't want to leave them in doubt that it's happening.
Right. That gray area creates so much additional stress.
Exactly, right? Like, you don't want them to think like, oh, might be a good idea to get surgery. No, that's not the way you approach it. Like, it's definitely happening, but also I get that it's hard. And that's how you want to deliver this message. Like, I'm not being forceful, and you don't need to be forceful because you're not asking them for anything. You're not making a demand of them. It's not like you need to do this or you need to do that, and I'm putting my foot down. This is about me. So I can be really soft and kind and compassionate, but also very clear and resolute, right? Like, this is definitely happening. And I know that it could be hard for you. And that sets up, I think, the best kind of process to then move into actually implementing your plan following that.
That's a really great metaphor. That's really helpful. I'm going to have to file that one away and remember that one. That's a good one. Okay, so here we are, like, our child is experiencing anxiety and expecting us to accommodate, and we do not. There could be some aggression that shows up, right? How should parents respond to that?
Yeah, there can be. It turns out, to absolutely nobody's surprise, that when you start reducing the accommodation, children do not universally thank you right away and congratulate you and your really deep understanding of how child anxiety works. And no, that's not the only response you might encounter, right? Like, a kid might get mad, they might get angry. And what I say to parents is, look, most of the aggression that you might encounter, honestly, the best thing to do is to ignore it. As long as it's within the realm of what you could ignore, ignore it. If your child is raising their voice or slamming a door, using a bad word, even a certain level of physical aggression is ignorable, right? Like, a 5-year-old who's pounding on your leg, that's not like a 15-year-old who's attacking you, right? It's a little child. If it's within the level of ignorable, I would say to ignore it. And remember that what you're seeing is anxiety. it's not bad behavior. I mean, it is not good behavior, right? Like, we don't want to see this behavior. I'm not trying to say it's fine if your child uses a bad word. It's not great, but it's anxiety. It's like looking at a child who's scared of needles and is getting a shot and is frantically lashing out and hits the nurse. Yeah, is it good to hit a nurse? No, it isn't good. But you don't look at that child and you say, what a horrible kid who goes around beating up nurses, right? That's silly. You look at it and you say, wow, this kid is so scared. And that helps you to be a little bit more empathetic toward what you're seeing. It frankly always amazes me that everybody I ever meet knows the phrase fight or flight. I don't know when I last encountered a person who'd never heard the phrase fight or flight. But so often people forget that half of that is fight, right? Anxiety primes us for flight through fear, etc., but it also primes us for fight through feelings of anger and rage and things like that. And what you're seeing is your kid lashing out in anxiety. So you just ignore it. They will calm down, and then you just continue with your plan. You can come back, give them a hug, and you know what? And this is like feels counterintuitive, but when you don't accommodate and your child has this big outburst, and even with some aggression, and then they're calm, what I suggest is coming to them and saying, I'm really proud of you. Why? Because you got through that moment without the accommodation. And you can make a choice instead of focusing on, that really wasn't okay. You're not allowed to behave that way. We have rules around here, blah, blah, blah. You can reflect to them the fact that they actually got through a tough moment on their own. Even if it wasn't the most graceful way of coping, but they got through it. And it's so much more positive than just trying to discipline this horrible behavior that you did. Look, sometimes the behavior is going to cross the line to what is not really ignorable by any reasonable standard. And then, of course, you have to address it. And you can do a lot of that addressing before it happens. How? By thinking about how to prevent it. If you see your kid getting angry, don't escalate, right? If they're getting close to you and they're raising their voice, don't stick your finger in their face and say, hey, we don't do that around here. You're just inviting more anger from them. Take a step back. If you notice yourself getting angry, take a step back, go for that walk with the dog, get some distance. And if you weren't able to prevent it and it did happen, I think the best way to respond to it is not through punishments or lashing back out or retaliating or taking away their stuff. Honestly, the best way that we've found to address it is actually by making use of some of those other people, some of those supporters in your life. Have this kid get a few phone calls or visits from some of the other people in their lives who reach out and say, I think you're a great kid, and I know you've been having a hard time. And also, I heard from your mom that yesterday you smashed their TV, or you punched your dad, or you did this, and I want you to know that is physical violence and it's not okay. And maybe next time you're so upset, you could give me a call or come over to my house, or let's go get a milkshake. And that message, which isn't trying to shame the child or tell them how horrible they are and how they've disgraced the family, it's a really supportive, positive message, but it does create some accountability for the behavior, and it is more likely to inhibit that behavior the next time than most of the other kinds of punishments that people might usually gravitate toward.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And having those other people, it's almost like when you tap into that village, it can be like a pressure release valve, because it's like there's more to my universe than that, me and this other person who's refusing to accommodate me. They're, it's even sometimes tapping into that flea. I can always call grandpa and he will come and take me for a walk. And then I don't have to be right in my mom's face or my dad's face or whatever. I think your job in that moment is to be the emotional state that you want to see in your child. Mirroring is so powerful, and it can easily go the other way. You were describing where if your kid is starting to ratchets up the aggression, then you ratchet up the aggression, and then they ratchet it and then you're going in the wrong direction. So I think too, when you talk about ignoring I like to make the distinction that you can ignore the behavior without ignoring the human,
Mhm.
so oftentimes like a little kid will be like screaming and thrashing, but they'll also be like curled up in your lap while they're, and you can be like gently loving them without responding literally to every word that they say. Like, I hate you. Why would you say that? You don't hate me. Like, you don't have to get into all of that. You can ignore that behavior, like the things that are just anxieties, kind of like last dying breaths, sort of their like last attempt at no, anxiety is going to win. And like to ignore that and without ignoring like the human being in front of you, I think is really like soothing to their soul. It's kind of like a tether.
I think that's exactly it. And, when you're in a difficult emotional state, seeing somebody else in the same emotional state is not going to calm you down.
No.
Right? Go back to my fear of flying. If I'm on an airplane and it's bumping around and I feel scared, I don't want to look at a flight attendant and see them freaking out. That is not helpful, right? You want to see them calmly pushing a drink trolley and serving somebody a drink. And then, I was going to say, and then you calm down. Honestly, my own anxious brain then comes up with the idea that, of course, they trained them to look calm as you plummet to your death. But I would
Conspiracy.
It's a conspiracy, but it's much more calming than seeing somebody else who's just mirroring your affect right back at you.
Mm-hmm.
It's there's another metaphor that I'll sometimes share with parents. It's mildly melodramatic, but I'll say, imagine that you're out walking with your child somewhere, and oh no, they fell into a hole, like a well or a pit or something like that, and they hurt and they're scared and they're alone, and every part of you might feel like, I want to jump in there and be there with them and hold them and say, I'm here. But if you do that, now you got two people stuck in a hole, right? Like, your ability to help your child, it often relies on recognizing what your child is experiencing, but being able to be in a somewhat different emotional state yourself so that you can be not in the hole and do productive things that will actually help. And that's true for the anxiety itself, because your child's anxiety can make you really anxious.
Mm-hmm.
Now, your kid has a panic attack, you might want to rush to the emergency room, but you're just confirming for them that this is an emergency, right? Like, you're telling them, yep, it's an emergency. It's literally there in the name, emergency room. So, you want to be calm in that moment. And it's also true in the anger. If your child is angry, if you're just as angry, well, then who's the calm one, right? Like, where's the calm
You're
coming
both in that well.
from? Exactly.
Man, you are really like winning the metaphor game today. These are like,
thank you.
these are good. These are really good. Okay, what can parents do if they disagree on how best to respond to a child's anxiety? Because like oftentimes the parents are not on the same page. So how do you recommend families like work through that?
Parents not on the same page?
Never happened here in our house.
That's a new one to me. No. Yeah, obviously, there are so many things that can get in the way of being on the same page, from different parenting styles to just literally spending very different amounts of time with a child, or just understanding this differently, or sometimes some blame or some guilt that are thrown around between two parents. And like, so many things can challenge. And let's face it, even totally unrelated marital or relationship stressors. If you have a belly full of anger at your partner or your ex because of whatever, well, it's a little bit harder to work on your child's anxiety treatment too, even if it's theoretically not related. How can parents try to get a little bit more on the same page? I think that one of the things that really helps the most is recognizing that a lot of times what two parents are doing when they're not on the same page is taking that recipe for support, the acceptance and the confidence, and just splitting it up between them, right? So you end up with two parents and neither one is really being supportive, but they're both representing one of those ingredients. So maybe one is really accepting and maybe also very accommodating, very protective, and maybe the other one is confident, but overly demanding and a little bit harsh. But that means that between the two of them, they have the two really most critical ingredients. Recognizing that helps a lot, because it means we don't have to figure out who's right here. It's not a question of it's your way or it's my way. It's a question of stitching those two pieces of the support a little bit back together. And it's really important to recognize it, because until you do, you actually tend to do the opposite thing. You push each other further and further and further to the extremes. If I think I'm the only parent who's showing any acceptance, I'm going to be extra super accepting and I won't give an inch to anything else. And vice versa. If I'm the only one who's like in touch with reality and confident that you have to cope and get a grip, well, I'm going to be extra super confident and demanding because I can't give an inch to anything else. Once you realize that we're both holding really critical, important pieces to succeed here, it gets easier to start putting those two pieces back together. I also recommend to parents, don't talk about the plan or this work or the treatment in the worst possible moments. And I say that because, we like to avoid conversations that are difficult as long as we can. And what that means is, when do we end up having them? When we have no choice. When we're under the most stress.
When we're fighting about the dishes.
When we're fighting about the dishes, or the child's right there in the throes of anxiety, and now I see you not following the plan, and I pounce on you, and I say, I knew you weren't going to follow through because you never do, and you're just trying to undermine me, and you're so helpless, and it comes out so ugly and so critical and not productive. If you were to bite your tongue then and wait a few hours, there's a good chance that it would sound more like, today I noticed that you didn't follow the plan, which is something another parent might be able to hear. So maybe set aside a time in your day for a check-in, right? Like right before you push play on your favorite Netflix show or your ball game or, whatever it is, take 5 minutes then to check in about the plan, and maybe try not to talk about it the rest of the time so that we don't have those, ugly conversations, and it can be a little bit more productive.
Yeah, there's this writing reflex thing that exists in a dynamic with two people, and you can see it with a parent and a child. You can see it in co-parents, where if one parent is leaning so far one direction, the other parent just unconsciously leans equally as far back to balance it out. Exactly. And so one of the things you recommended in the book is maybe even just for pretensies, just for a day or a week or whatever, switch places. Which is things playful almost exercises like that can be really helpful in getting people out of it. Because if you just stop, you'll both fall. That's what it feels like. So kind of having some sort of exercises or activities where you can both get out of that leaning back state, both kind of come together, maybe even switch sides, like you said, can be helpful. That can make a big difference. And I love the framing you have of it being they're each one half of the support that's needed. That's so strength and solution based. So it makes us feel like we're not that far off.
Exactly. We're not far off. Sometimes paradoxically or ironically, sometimes the parents who are really struggling to work together can end up really making a great team because they do have those two components. But what we need to realize is that as long as you're splitting it between the two parents, you don't end up with an average of support. Right? That doesn't work. Since
That's not how the math works.
It doesn't work like that. Since I'm in the running for the metaphor, World Cup, I will. I'll give you one more, which is having two parents split apart those two ingredients of support. It's a little bit like putting two people in a rowboat and having them row in opposite directions. Mm-hmm. And you don't end up traveling at a moderate speed. You just turn around in place, right? You don't go anywhere. And so we need to stitch those pieces back together, and just a little bit, right? Maybe the parent who's much more on the accepting side is still going to be more on that side than the other. Maybe they'll never be quite as, quite where their partner or their ex or whatever would like them to be, but they can be a little bit closer. And that's actually enough for most cases to be able to get some work done.
Yeah. And you talked about that, scaffolding of the accommodations, that can be helpful here too in this conversation with finding the least common denominator. What's the step at which you can both agree to go all in on and follow through on, and to not be afraid to really take a small step as opposed to frustrating because the big step you want to take it, they seem so far apart. Find that smaller step that you can both agree on.
Exactly.
Okay, the show notes can be found at sagefamily.com/podcast80, where you can also subscribe and get future show notes sent right to your inbox. What, Ellie, are your favorite resources for people to dive deeper into this topic? And tell us about all your things.
Okay, well, thank you. I would recommend a couple of things. There's a website devoted to this treatment, SPACE, and that is spacetreatment.net. Spacetreatment.net. There's tons of resources there. You can find articles, whether those are more research articles or even just, media articles like The Atlantic or Wall Street Journal, stuff like that. There are videos, there's links to books, you can find a lot of resources. Also, for parents who are maybe coping with their own anxious child, there is a list of therapists, of providers who are trained in this treatment. And you can search that by your location or whatnot and find somebody to work with. So that's one resource, is spacetreatment.net. There's a Facebook page for SPACE. You won't find Eli Lebowitz on social media. I just missed the boat on that. I missed the boat on that entirely. But SPACE is on Facebook. And so if you go to facebook.com/space treatments, that's plural, space treatments, you can find the Facebook page where there's lots of, also, I'll post things there, resources, podcasts like this, or other people's work that is relevant. And there's also a group you can join through that Facebook page. There's a group that's open to anybody. There's also a group that's more specific to providers who are doing SPACE. I would say there's a YouTube channel for SPACE. There is, but there's like 4 videos on it. However, that's because I'm busy, but I actually still recommend going to it because the 4 videos that are there, I think, are really helpful. Like there's one on like, here's a simple trick for getting your kid to sleep in their own bed, which is something so many parents struggle with. There's a really nice 20-minute documentary film about SPACE, which is just like a couple of families going through the treatment, and I think sort of brings that to life. So you can find that on YouTube. And I would highlight for parents the book Breaking Free of Child Anxiety and OCD, which really just walks you through a very step-by-step kind of practical approach to implementing this even on your own.
Yeah, I think I watched that YouTube video, one of your 4, that 20-minute one. It gives a nice snapshot for parents who are like, oh, I want to understand more about what this might be like. It gives you a nice sort of case study of some families and some kids. So that can be really helpful. And then the book was great. The Breaking Free of Childhood Anxiety and OCD, that's really where I got to dive a lot deeper into this. And I know a lot of my audience loves to read. And so this one should definitely get added to their bookshelf. It's a really good one. Even if your child hasn't been officially diagnosed with anxiety or OCD, if any part of this conversation has resonated with you, then you will find that book helpful. And we will link to all of this stuff in the show notes. And I will try and spread the word far and wide about this wonderful work that you're bringing to life for us. So thank you so much, Ellie. I really, really appreciated this conversation. You have exceeded my expectations.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you. You've exceeded mine also because you're really well prepared.
Thank you.
For the conversations. I genuinely really appreciate that. And really, thanks for having me on.